Eleanor Brooks was last seen alive on November 6, 1989. She was 68 years old, walking the same trail she'd walked every morning for over a decade. But this time, she never came home. What happened that morning in the quiet woods of Vermont would remain a mystery for 19 years until a backhoe operator hit something that wasn't a rock. And when investigators finally uncovered the truth, they realized Eleanor's disappearance wasn't random. It was calculated, it was intentional, and it was murder. Maple Hollow, Vermont. Population 1,200. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where neighbors leave their doors unlocked and children play unsupervised in front yards until the streetlights flicker on. A town where nothing bad ever happens. Until November 6, 1989. Eleanor Brooks lived in a white clapboard house at the edge of town, perched on a gentle hill overlooking the tree line. The house had been in her family for nearly 4 decades. She'd raised 2 sons there, buried her husband there, in a sense, after Harold Brooks passed away from a heart attack in 1982. For 7 years after his death, Eleanor lived alone. But she wasn't lonely. The town adored her. She baked apple pies for the church fundraiser every autumn. She looked after Allison Blake's children when Allison worked late shifts at the diner. She never missed Sunday service at Maple Hollow Community Church, always sitting in the 3rd pew from the front, always wearing her navy dress with the pearl buttons. But beneath that gentle, predictable surface, there was tension. Family tension. The kind that festers quietly for years until it erupts into something irreversible. After Harold died, Eleanor inherited the house and a modest savings account. Nothing extravagant, just enough to live comfortably in her retirement. But her 2 sons, Michael and David, saw things differently. They saw opportunity. They saw money. And by 1989, they saw their mother as an obstacle. Michael Brooks was the younger of the 2. He was 42 years old in 1989, living in Austin, Texas, working construction jobs that never seemed to last more than a few months. He had gambling debts, he had a temper, and he had a plan. David, the older brother, lived in Burlington, Vermont, about an hour's drive from Maple Hollow. He was quieter than Michael, more calculating. He worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, earning a decent salary. But David wanted more. He wanted his inheritance now, not later. Not when Eleanor passed away naturally at some distant point in the future. Now. In the summer of 1989, Michael and David began pressuring their mother to sell the family home. They claimed it was for her own good. The house was too big for one person. The property taxes were too high. She'd be better off in a smaller apartment in town, closer to the church, closer to her friends. But Eleanor refused. The house wasn't just a structure, it was memory. It was Harold's workshop in the basement where he'd built furniture for half the town. It was the kitchen where she'd taught her sons to bake bread on Saturday mornings. It was the porch where she'd watched sunsets with Harold for 38 years. She wasn't selling, and she made that very clear. By late October, the pressure intensified. Michael flew in from Texas and stayed with David in Burlington. Together, they visited Eleanor on October 28, 1989. They brought paperwork, legal documents prepared by a lawyer David knew in Burlington. Documents that would transfer ownership of the house to both sons, who would then sell the property and divide the proceeds. Eleanor refused to sign. The argument that followed was bitter. Voices were raised. Accusations were hurled. Michael called her selfish. David called her unreasonable. Eleanor called them both ungrateful. She told them to leave, and she told them something else, something that would seal her fate. She told them she was changing her will. She was leaving everything to the Maple Hollow Community Church. Not a single dollar would go to either of them. Michael and David left that day in silence. But the silence wasn't acceptance. It was calculation. But here's what Eleanor didn't know. Here's what would make the next 8 days the most dangerous of her life. Michael wasn't just angry about losing his inheritance. He was desperate, and desperation makes people do unthinkable things. November 6, 1989. Monday morning. The temperature hovered around 38 degrees. A light frost covered the grass. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, but not yet delivering. Eleanor Brooks woke at 6:15 a.m., the same time she woke every morning. She made coffee in her old percolator, the one Harold had bought her in 1964. She fed her cat, a gray tabby named Willow. She ate a slice of toast with strawberry jam. And at 8:15 a.m., she put on her blue windbreaker, her wool gloves, and her knit hat. She locked the front door. She waved to her neighbor, Victoria Hayes, who was retrieving her newspaper from the driveway. And Eleanor Brooks walked toward the trail that looped through the woods behind the old mill road. Victoria Hayes would later tell police that Eleanor seemed cheerful that morning. She smiled. She waved. She said something about the cold weather finally arriving and how Willow had been particularly affectionate that morning. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing seemed wrong. But something was wrong because Eleanor Brooks never came home. By noon, Victoria noticed Eleanor's porch light was still on. That was unusual. Eleanor was meticulous about turning off lights during the day. She hated wasting electricity. She'd lecture anyone who left a room without flipping the switch. Victoria thought about walking over to check on her but decided against it. Maybe Eleanor had simply forgotten. Maybe she was running errands in town. But by 4 p.m., when Victoria saw Eleanor's car still parked in the driveway and the porch light still glowing in the dimming afternoon light, she felt a knot of worry tighten in her stomach. She called Allison Blake. Allison called Claire Watkins, another neighbor. Together, the three women walked to Eleanor's house at 5:30 p.m. They knocked. No answer. They called Eleanor's name. Silence. Claire tried the door. Locked. They peered through the windows. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. Eleanor's coffee cup sat on the kitchen table, half full, cold. A thin film had formed on the surface. Her purse rested on the counter, unzipped with her wallet visible inside. Her car keys hung on the hook by the door. The television was off. The house was empty. Eleanor Brooks had simply vanished. Victoria called the Maple Hollow Police Department at 5:47 p.m. Officer Garrett Lawson arrived within 15 minutes. He was 34 years old, a local boy who joined the force straight out of high school. Maple Hollow didn't see much crime, speeding tickets, occasional bar fights on Friday nights at McGill's Tavern, lost dogs, but a missing person? That was different. Garrett radioed for backup and began a preliminary search of the property. He checked the basement, where Harold's old tools still hung on pegboards, the attic, filled with dusty boxes of Christmas decorations, the backyard where Eleanor's vegetable garden lay dormant for the winter. He found nothing. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no blood, no note. Just an empty house and a missing 68-year-old woman. By 7:30 p.m., as darkness settled over Maple Hollow, a full search was underway. Police officers, firefighters, and volunteers from town spread out across the woods behind Eleanor's house. They carried flashlights and called her name. They checked the trail she walked every morning. They searched the area near the old mill, its wheel frozen and silent. They found nothing. No footprints in the frost-covered ground. No torn clothing caught on branches. No indication that Eleanor had ever been there. It was as if she'd simply vanished into the air. But here's what no one knew yet. Here's what wouldn't be discovered for 19 years. Eleanor Brooks didn't vanish. She was murdered. And the person who killed her had been waiting for her that morning. Waiting in the woods. Waiting with a plan. And waiting with something else. Evidence that would eventually destroy him. Michael Brooks had arrived in Maple Hollow the night before Eleanor disappeared. He didn't tell anyone he was in town. He didn't stay with his brother David in Burlington. He rented a room at a small motel 20 miles outside of town, paying cash under the name Gerald Stone. He drove a rental car, a dark blue Ford pickup truck he'd picked up from a Burlington rental agency on November 5th. He parked it on a dirt access road near the woods, hidden from view behind a stand of pine trees. And on the morning of November 6th, he walked to the trail where he knew his mother would be walking. He waited behind an old oak tree, partially hidden by undergrowth. And when Eleanor appeared at approximately 8:35 a.m., he stepped onto the trail and confronted her one final time. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Michael tried one last time to convince his mother to sign the property transfer documents. He'd brought them with him, folded in his jacket pocket. Eleanor refused. She told him she'd already contacted her lawyer. The will had been changed. Everything was going to the church. Michael felt something snap inside him. Years of resentment, Years of feeling like his mother favored others over her own sons. Years of financial stress and gambling debts crushing him. He lost control. He struck her. Once. Hard. With a heavy oak branch he'd picked up from the ground earlier that morning. The impact was devastating. Eleanor fell. She didn't get back up. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. Michael panicked. He stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. His mother lay on the cold ground, motionless. Blood seeped into the frost-covered leaves beneath her head. Michael looked around. No one was there. No witnesses. The woods were silent except for the distant call of a crow. He made a decision. He dragged her body off the trail, deeper into the woods, to a spot near a dry creek bed about 200 yards from the main path. The ground was soft there, easier to dig. He used his hands and a folding shovel he had brought in his backpack. He dug a shallow grave. It took him nearly an hour. His hands were raw and bleeding by the time he finished. He placed Eleanor's body in the grave. He covered her with dirt and leaves and branches. He tried to make it look like part of the natural landscape. And then he walked back to his rental truck, drove back to the motel, checked out, and flew back to Texas. The entire crime took less than 6 hours, and for 19 years, no one suspected him. But Michael made one critical mistake. One piece of evidence he didn't know he'd left behind. And 19 years later, that evidence would be his undoing. The investigation into Eleanor's disappearance lasted for months. Police interviewed everyone in town. They interviewed Michael and David. Both sons expressed shock and grief. Michael flew back to Vermont on November 8th for a press conference. He stood beside David and read a prepared statement, his voice breaking with what seemed like genuine emotion. He begged anyone with information to come forward. He offered a $5,000 reward. He said his mother was everything to him, and everyone believed him. Both sons had alibis. David said he was at work in Burlington the day Eleanor vanished. His co-workers confirmed it. They remembered him being in the office from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. Michael said he was in Texas. His girlfriend at the time, a woman named Rebecca Hughes, confirmed he'd been with her on November 6th. She said they'd spent the day together, running errands, watching television. The police had no evidence to suggest otherwise. No witnesses placed Michael in Vermont. No one had seen his rental car. No one had seen him on the trail. He had committed what he believed was the perfect crime. By the spring of 1990, the case went cold. Police had exhausted every lead. They had no body, no suspects, no evidence of foul play. The official theory was that Eleanor had wandered off the trail, gotten lost, and succumbed to the elements. Her body, they assumed, would eventually be found by hikers or hunters. But years passed, no body was found. Eleanor Brooks became a ghost story in Maple Hollow, a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in a small, safe town, terrible things can happen. Parents told their children to stay on marked trails. Hikers became more cautious, and slowly, the town moved on. But not everyone. Eleanor's best friend, Sophia Palmer, refused to move on. She refused to accept the official story. And for 19 years, Sophia kept Eleanor's memory alive. But what Sophia didn't know was that her persistence would eventually crack open a case everyone else had forgotten. Sophia Palmer was 67 years old when Eleanor vanished. She and Eleanor had been friends for over 30 years. They'd raised their children together, attended the same church, walked the same trails. They'd grieved together when their husbands died within 2 years of each other. They'd celebrated birthdays and holidays together. They'd shared secrets and dreams and fears. Sophia knew Eleanor better than anyone, and Sophia knew Eleanor would never have wandered off and gotten lost. Eleanor was too careful, too aware of her surroundings, too methodical in her routines. Something had happened to her, something deliberate, something evil, and Sophia spent the next 19 years trying to prove it. Sophia wrote letters to the police, to the local newspaper, the Maple Hollow Gazette, to the state attorney general's office, to anyone who would listen. She called detectives every few months, asking for updates, pushing them to reopen the case. She pestered the police chief until he stopped returning her calls. Most people in Maple Hollow thought Sophia was obsessed, grief-stricken, unable to let go. Some whispered that she'd gone a little crazy after Eleanor's disappearance. But Sophia didn't care what people thought. She owed Eleanor the truth. and she wasn't going to stop searching until she found it. In 2005, 16 years after Eleanor vanished, Sophia hired a private investigator. His name was Nathan Reed. He was 48 years old, based in Burlington, and specialized in cold cases. He'd worked as a homicide detective for 20 years before going private. Nathan agreed to look into Eleanor's disappearance, though he warned Sophia that the chances of finding new evidence after 16 years were slim. Most cold cases stayed cold. Most missing persons stayed missing. But Sophia insisted. She offered to pay him whatever it took. She liquidated her savings. She sold family heirlooms. She was determined to get answers before she died. Nathan Reed was thorough. He reviewed every police report from the original investigation. He interviewed witnesses who'd been questioned in 1989. He walked the trails where Eleanor had vanished, studying the terrain, looking for places where a body could have been hidden. And he noticed something the original investigators had either missed or dismissed as irrelevant. On the day Eleanor disappeared, a witness named Madison Grant, who lived on Maple Ridge Road about 2 miles from the trail, had reported seeing an unfamiliar pickup truck parked on the dirt access road near the woods. The truck was dark blue. Madison couldn't remember the license plate. She'd mentioned it to police during the initial investigation, but they'd never followed up. There were dozens of dark blue pickup trucks in Vermont. It wasn't enough to go on. But Nathan Reed was persistent. He started tracking down every dark blue pickup truck registered in Vermont in 1989. It took months. It was tedious, exhausting work. He called DMV offices. He reviewed rental agency records. He interviewed truck owners. And eventually, in late 2005, he found something. A rental agreement from a Burlington rental agency dated November 5th, 1989. The vehicle, a dark blue Ford F-150 pickup truck. The renter's name, Gerald Stone. But when Nathan tried to verify the information, nothing checked out. The address listed on the rental form was fake. A vacant lot in South Burlington. The credit card used was a prepaid card that couldn't be traced. And the truck had been returned on November 7th, 1989, with extra mileage. Mileage that suggested someone had driven to Maple Hollow and back. Nathan Reed had found the phantom truck. But who was Gerald Stone? And why had he disappeared without a trace? The answer would shock everyone who knew the Brooks family. Nathan presented his findings to the Maple Hollow Police Department in early 2006. The case had a new police chief by then, a woman named Detective Megan Phillips. She was 39 years old, ambitious, and frustrated by the number of unsolved cases in her jurisdiction. She reviewed Nathan's report with interest. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. She agreed to reopen Eleanor Brooks' case as a suspicious disappearance. Nathan kept digging. He tracked down the rental agency employee who had processed the transaction in 1989. The man was retired by then, living in Maine, working part-time at a hardware store. But he remembered the customer. He described him as tall, around 6 feet, nervous, early 40s, with brown hair and a slight Southern accent. He'd paid cash for everything. He'd refused the insurance. He'd seemed in a hurry. The description matched Michael Brooks perfectly. Detective Phillips obtained a warrant to review Michael Brooks's financial records from 1989. What she found was damning. On November 4th, 1989, Michael had withdrawn $800 in cash from an ATM in Austin, Texas. On November 5th, he'd purchased a one-way plane ticket from Austin to Burlington, Vermont, departing at 6 a.m. and arriving at 2:15 p.m. There was no return ticket on record. On November 7th, he'd purchased another one-way ticket from Burlington to Austin, departing at 11 a.m. And in the weeks following Eleanor's death, Michael had made several large cash deposits into his bank account. Deposits that didn't match his reported income. Deposits totaling $12,000 between November 15th and December 31st, 1989. Detective Phillips also discovered something else, something that would blow the case wide open. In 1990, Michael and David had successfully petitioned the Bennington County Probate Court to have Eleanor declared legally dead. This had allowed them to inherit her estate. The house was sold in August 1990 for $87,000. The proceeds were split between the two brothers. Michael used his share to pay off gambling debts he owed to several bookmakers in Texas. David used his share to invest in his business. Both sons had financially benefited from their mother's disappearance. But Detective Phillips still needed more than financial records. She needed physical evidence. She needed a body. And for 19 years, Eleanor Brooks's body remained hidden in the woods outside Maple Hollow until March 14, 2008. In early 2008, the state of Vermont announced plans to build a new highway bypass through the woods outside Maple Hollow. Construction would begin in March, and on the second day of clearing, a piece of heavy machinery would uncover something that had been buried for nearly 2 decades, something that would change everything. The Vermont Department of Transportation awarded the highway construction contract to a company called Granite State Construction in January 2008. The project required clearing several miles of forest to make room for a 4-lane bypass that would redirect traffic away from Maple Hollow's downtown area. Construction crews arrived on March 12th with bulldozers, backhoes, and excavators. They began tearing through the tree line, uprooting decades-old oaks and pines, reshaping the landscape. And on March 14th, 2008, at approximately 11:30 a.m., a backhoe operator named Connor Davidson was clearing debris near a dry creek bed when he hit something solid. At first, Connor thought it was a rock, a boulder buried beneath the soil. He'd hit dozens of them over the past 2 days. But when he climbed down from his machine to investigate, he saw something that made his blood run cold. It was bone, human bone, partially exposed by the backhoe's bucket, a section of what looked like a rib cage wrapped in decayed blue fabric. Connor immediately stopped work and called his supervisor, a man named Blake Anderson. Blake took one look at the site and called 911. Within an hour, the construction site was sealed off with yellow tape. The police were notified, and by 3 p.m., forensic investigators from the Vermont State Police were on scene. The remains were carefully excavated over the next 3 days. Forensic anthropologists worked slowly, methodically, documenting every detail. What they found confirmed what Sophia Palmer had believed for 19 years. This was Eleanor Brooks. Dental records matched perfectly. The rusted frame of a woman's watch was found near the remains, partially buried in the soil. The watch had belonged to Eleanor. It had been a gift from Harold on their 25th wedding anniversary in 1973. The inscription on the back read, "To my Eleanor, forever and always, Harold." But the most damning piece of evidence was the skull. Forensic analysis revealed clear signs of blunt force trauma. A massive fracture on the left side of the skull, consistent with being struck by a heavy object with significant force. The medical examiner estimated the blow would have caused immediate loss of consciousness and death within minutes. Eleanor Brooks had been murdered, and her killer had buried her in a shallow grave less than half a mile from her daily walking trail. The case was immediately reopened as a homicide investigation. Detective Logan Pierce was assigned to lead the investigation. Logan was 41 years old, a 15-year veteran of the Vermont State Police Major Crime Unit. He specialized in cold cases and had a reputation for being thorough, meticulous, and relentless. Logan reviewed every piece of evidence from the original investigation. He studied Nathan Reed's private investigation findings. He examined Detective Phillips' financial analysis, and he made Michael Brooks his primary suspect. Logan interviewed Michael and David Brooks again on March 20th, 2008. Both men were now in their early 60s. David had retired from his sales job and was living in Scottsdale, Arizona. Michael was still in Austin, working as a foreman for a small construction company. Both men claimed they had no idea who could have killed their mother. Both men expressed shock at the discovery, but Logan noticed something during Michael's interview. Michael seemed nervous. His hands trembled slightly as he sipped water from a plastic cup. He avoided eye contact when answering questions about his whereabouts in November 1989. He kept shifting in his seat, crossing and uncrossing his legs. Logan's instincts told him Michael was hiding something. Logan obtained a warrant to collect DNA samples from both Michael and David Brooks. Both men complied. The samples were sent to the Vermont Forensic Laboratory for analysis. And in April 2008, the results came back. Forensic technicians had extracted DNA from trace evidence found on Eleanor's remains. Specifically, they'd found skin cells embedded in the fabric of her blue windbreaker, skin cells that didn't belong to Eleanor. The DNA was run through the National CODIS database. No match. But when compared to Michael Brooks' DNA sample, there was a match. The skin cells found on Eleanor's clothing belonged to Michael Brooks. Confronted with DNA evidence, Michael Brooks could have remained silent. He could have called a lawyer, But instead, he started talking, and what he revealed would make his crime even more unforgivable than anyone had imagined. Logan Pierce brought Michael Brooks in for questioning on April 28, 2008. The interrogation took place in a small room at the Vermont State Police Barracks in Rutland. Logan sat across from Michael at a metal table. He laid out the evidence methodically: the rental truck, the witness statement, the financial records, the DNA match. Each piece of evidence was a nail in Michael's coffin, and slowly over the course of a 12-hour interrogation, Michael Brooks began to crack. He didn't confess immediately. He didn't break down in tears and admit his guilt. Instead, he started talking. He started explaining. He started justifying. He said his mother had been unreasonable. She'd refused to listen to reason. She'd threatened to disinherit him over what he called a misunderstanding. He said he hadn't meant to kill her. He'd only wanted to talk to her, to convince her one last time. But she wouldn't listen. She'd turned away from him. She'd called him a failure. She'd said she was ashamed of him, and he'd lost control. He'd picked up a branch, he'd swung it, just once, and she'd fallen. And then it was too late. He'd panicked. He'd buried her. He'd driven back to Texas, and he'd spent 19 years trying to forget what he'd done. But Logan Pierce wasn't buying the self-defense narrative. He pressed harder. He asked Michael about the gambling debts. Michael admitted he'd owed money to several bookmakers in Austin in 1989. Over $30,000. They'd threatened him. One of them had sent 2 men to his apartment in October 1989. They'd beaten him badly enough to crack 2 of his ribs. They'd told him he had until the end of the year to pay or they'd kill him. Michael saw his mother's house as his only way out. If he could just get her to sell the property, he'd have enough money to pay off the debts and start over. But Eleanor refused, and so Michael decided that if she wouldn't give him the money willingly, he'd take it after she was gone. But here's the thing Michael Brooks didn't know. Here's the secret that would make his crime even darker. Eleanor had been keeping evidence that could have destroyed Michael long before he ever killed her. After Eleanor's body was discovered and the investigation intensified, Sophia Palmer contacted Logan Pierce with new information. She'd been storing some of Eleanor's personal belongings in her attic since 1989. Eleanor had asked her to hold on to certain items just in case something happened. At the time, Sophia thought Eleanor was just being cautious. But now, looking back, she wondered if Eleanor had sensed danger. Among the boxes Sophia had stored were file folders, legal documents, bank statements, all of them related to Michael's business dealings in Texas. And what those documents revealed was shocking. In 1988, Michael had been working for a construction company in Austin called Redwood Builders. He'd been hired as an assistant project manager. But according to the documents Eleanor had collected, Michael had been embezzling money from the company. He'd been submitting fake invoices for materials that were never purchased. He'd been authorizing payments to contractors who didn't exist. Over the course of 18 months, Michael had stolen over $100,000 from Redwood Builders. Eleanor had discovered the evidence during a visit to Michael's apartment in July 1989. She'd found the documents hidden in a box in his closet. She'd confronted him about it during their argument in October 1989. She told him she was going to report him to the authorities if he didn't turn himself in. She told him she wouldn't protect him anymore. And that's when Michael realized his mother wasn't just an obstacle to his inheritance. She was a threat to his freedom. If she reported him, he'd go to prison. He'd lose everything. And so he decided his mother had to die. Michael Brooks was arrested on May 5, 2008. He was charged with first-degree murder. The trial began in October 2008 at the Bennington County Courthouse. It lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The DNA, the financial records showing Michael's gambling debts and the deposits after Eleanor's death. The rental truck records with the fake name. The witness who'd seen the truck. Nathan Reed's investigation. Michael's own partial confession during the interrogation. The defense argued that Michael had acted in a moment of passion, that he hadn't planned to kill his mother, that it was manslaughter, not premeditated murder. But the prosecution countered with the evidence of the rental truck, the fake name, the cash payment, and the pre-planned burial. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated. It was premeditated. It was murder for financial gain. On November 12, 2008, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Michael Brooks showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He stared straight ahead, his face expressionless. On December 3, 2008, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned and looked at Sophia Palmer, who was sitting in the front row. Their eyes met for just a moment. Sophia later said she saw no remorse in his eyes, no regret, just emptiness. David Brooks was never charged with a crime. There was no evidence he'd been involved in Eleanor's murder or had any knowledge of Michael's plan. But his life was destroyed nonetheless. The scandal consumed him. He lost friends. His business connections dried up. He couldn't walk down the street in Burlington without people whispering and pointing. He moved out of Vermont in early 2009. He sold his house at a loss. He cut ties with everyone he knew. Some people said guilt drove him away. Others said shame. Either way, David Brooks disappeared from public life just as completely as his mother had disappeared from hers. The last anyone heard of him, he was living somewhere in New Mexico under his middle name, working as a consultant for a pharmaceutical company. Sophia Palmer attended every day of Michael's trial. She sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution team. She listened to every witness. She studied every piece of evidence. She looked Michael in the eye every single day. And when the verdict was read, Sophia wept. Not tears of joy, not tears of relief, tears of grief for her friend, for the 19 years Eleanor had spent buried in the woods, for the justice that came too late, for the friendship that had been stolen from her. After the sentencing, Sophia gave an interview to the Maple Hollow Gazette. She was 86 years old by then, her voice strong but weary. She said Eleanor Brooks died because she refused to sign a piece of paper, because she refused to compromise her values, because she stood up to a son who saw her as nothing more than a bank account. That tells you everything you need to know about what happened to her, and it tells you everything you need to know about the man who killed her. Eleanor Brooks was finally laid to rest in the Maple Hollow Cemetery on December 5, 2008. Her funeral was attended by over 300 people. The entire town shut down for the service. Businesses closed, schools let out early. People lined the streets as the hearse passed. Sophia Palmer delivered the eulogy, her voice breaking as she spoke. She talked about Eleanor's kindness, her strength, her refusal to be silenced, her love for her community, her devotion to her friends, and she spoke about the danger of family greed, about what happens when love is replaced by entitlement, when parents become obstacles instead of people, when money becomes more important than human life. Sophia ended her eulogy with words that would be repeated in news articles, true crime documentaries, and podcasts for years to come. Eleanor Brooks waited 19 years for her truth to be told. She waited in silence, she waited in darkness, but her truth finally emerged. And when it did, justice came with it. That's what we owe every victim. That's what we owe everyone who's been silenced by violence. We owe them the truth. We owe them justice. And we owe them our refusal to forget. The house where Eleanor lived still stands in Maple Hollow at 47 Hillside Drive. It's been owned by several different families since 1990. None of them stayed longer than 5 years. Some said the house felt heavy with sadness. Others said they felt a presence, not frightening, but watchful. The current owners, a young family with 3 children, say they sometimes feel Eleanor's presence in the kitchen where she used to bake. They say the house feels protective, like someone is watching over them. They've hung a photograph of Eleanor in the hallway, a gesture of respect. The children leave flowers on the porch sometimes, especially on November 6th, the anniversary of her disappearance. The trail where Eleanor used to walk every morning is still there. It was officially renamed the Eleanor Brooks Memorial Trail in 2009. A ceremony was held on a warm June morning. Over 200 people attended. A wooden plaque was installed at the trailhead. It reads, "In memory of Eleanor Brooks, 1921 to 1989, a beloved member of the Maple Hollow community, a woman of strength, kindness, and unwavering integrity. Taken too soon, never forgotten. May all who walk this trail remember her courage." People still walk the trail regularly, mostly locals, sometimes tourists who've heard the story. And on cold November mornings and when the frost covers the ground and the sky is overcast, some people report seeing a figure in a blue windbreaker and wool hat walking slowly through the trees. They say it's Eleanor, still taking her morning walk, still watching over the town she loved. Michael Brooks is currently serving his life sentence at the Vermont State Prison in St. Albans. He's 61 years old now, as of 2008. He's been denied parole twice in 2018 and 2023. He'll likely die in prison. According to prison staff, Michael keeps to himself. He works in the prison library. He doesn't receive visitors. Some inmates report that Michael talks about his mother sometimes late at night in his cell, that he expresses regret, that he cries. Others say he still blames Eleanor for everything, claiming she was selfish and stubborn. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Michael Brooks is a man who destroyed his own life and the life of the woman who gave birth to him, all for money he never even got to keep, all because he couldn't wait, all because he valued inheritance over love. Sophia Palmer passed away peacefully in her sleep on June 18, 2015, at the age of 92. She'd lived long enough to see Eleanor's killer brought to justice. She'd lived long enough to see her friend properly buried. She'd lived long enough to tell Eleanor's story to anyone who would listen. In her later years, Sophia became an advocate for families of missing persons. She worked with the Vermont Cold Case Unit. She spoke at conferences about the importance of never giving up. She helped other families navigate the terrible uncertainty of having a loved one disappear. In her final interview, given just 6 weeks before her death to a podcaster who was covering Eleanor's case, Sophia said this: "I spent 19 years refusing to give up on my friend. 19 years of letters and phone calls and pestering police officers who probably thought I was crazy. And I'd do it all over again. Because when someone you love goes missing, you don't get closure until you get answers. And Eleanor deserved answers. She deserved justice. She deserved to be remembered as more than just a missing person. And I'm so grateful I lived long enough to see her getting all of that." The case of Eleanor Brooks has been featured in multiple true crime documentaries, including an episode of Cold Case Files that aired in 2010 and a 2-part special on Investigation Discovery in 2012. It's been covered in podcasts like Criminal and Case File True Crime. It's been written about in books analyzing family violence and inheritance-motivated murders. It's been used as a teaching example in criminal justice courses at the University of Vermont and Vermont Law School. Forensic psychologists have studied the case as an example of how financial desperation can lead to family violence. And it's become a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and what happens when money becomes more important than human life. But for the people of Maple Hollow, Eleanor Brooks isn't just a case study. She isn't just a statistic in a forensic psychology textbook. She isn't just the subject of true crime entertainment. She's a memory. She's the woman who baked apple pies that won first prize at the county fair 3 years in a row. She's the woman who looked after children when their parents needed help. She's the woman who walked the same trail every morning for over a decade, rain or shine. She's the woman who loved her town. She's the woman who trusted her son. And she's the woman who paid the ultimate price for refusing to be controlled. Eleanor Brooks was 68 years old when she died. She was murdered by her own son on a cold November morning. She was buried in a shallow grave in the woods she loved. And for 19 years, no one knew where she was. For 19 years, her killer walked free, spending the money he'd stolen from her estate. For 19 years, her best friend refused to give up searching for her. And when Eleanor's story finally emerged from that shallow grave in 2008, it became something more than just a cold case. It became a testament to persistence, to loyalty, to the power of refusing to forget. Eleanor Brooks waited 19 years for her truth to be told. And when it finally was, the world listened. Her story reminds us that truth doesn't die when it's buried. It just waits. It waits for someone to care enough to dig it up. And when truth finally surfaces, justice follows. That's Eleanor's legacy. That's what she left behind. A reminder that every victim deserves justice, no matter how long it takes. A reminder that the people we trust can sometimes be the ones who hurt us most. And a reminder that some friendships, like Sophia and Eleanor's, are strong enough to survive even death. If you ever find yourself driving through Vermont in the autumn, when the leaves turn gold and red and the air smells like wood smoke and apples. Take the exit from Maple Hollow. Drive down Hillside Drive and look for number 47, the white clapboard house on the hill. Then walk to the Eleanor Brooks Memorial Trail. Stand at the trailhead and read the plaque. Walk the path she walked every morning for over a decade. And think about the woman who loved this place. Think about the friend who never gave up on her. Think about the 19 years of silence that were finally broken. And remember that Eleanor Brooks' story isn't just about murder. It's about memory. It's about loyalty. It's about justice delayed, but not denied. It's about making sure that every victim, no matter how long they've been gone, gets their story told. And Eleanor's story is one worth telling, one worth remembering, one worth never, ever forgetting.